Oh, hey camera, YouTube, Ian. Okay. I of course forgot some things in my last video. Namely, I didn't even sketch out the initial plan I had for these partition walls made of reclaimed plastic bottle columns. So yeah, I did this sketch. I already sent this to you through Facebook. I can't go in here. I have filled it with junk, and it's we're low light in this corner. I don't know, just do this here. Laundry in the way. Get more light. That should help. Okay. All right, let's try that. Let's see. I can tilt this right. How? Okay, there we go. Yeah, that should be good. Okay. Okay. Ah, real professional. There we go. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. All right. Okay. So, cat. You like my drawing? Grr? Okay. Let's see. Is their coverage good? Tipped up a little bit. Okay. All right. Here we go. So, just to explain the details of this, this is kind of an exploded view. I think you're going to want these slats on both sides. Okay. This info you already have, so I may erase some of this as I work. And you're just in the way, girl. One of the basic concepts I didn't get to, these columns you're making are essentially a straw in terms of strength. Straws are very strong against longitudinal forces. They can't be crushed from the ends. Grr, you're not even supposed to be in these videos according to contract. Okay. Straws are not strong to torque. They're really weak to torque or shear forces. A shear force is one where the forces are near each other, so it can actually cause like a split or a cut. Torque is going to be farther away, so that or often torque comes from opposing forces on the end. These forces are just going to rip up a straw, but what you're making is even weaker than a straw because it's a segmented straw made out of separate bottles. It's still going to be strong from top and bottom, but any forces laterally are going to cause gravity to trigger and kick in, and these are going to try and just slop loose and stuff. So the general idea is to create a containment cage for each of these strips of columns to form walls out of them, and I think it'll look pretty cool because what you'll end up with will almost look like a crate of pop or something. It will look a lot like a shipping container just full of bottles, plastic bottles, which I think is cool. And that general concept I find cool because you're not taking the plastic and hiding it in the earth like we do in America with landfills. you are pulling the plastic from the environment where it shouldn't be and putting it back to good use. And especially those the green columns you've made, when they catch the sunlight behind them, they are beautiful. Anyway, so the general idea of this is to try and just keep this caged enough on all four sides. Of course, along the length of the wall, by squeezing them in this frame, they're going to hold each other up left and right, so nothing should be a problem here. But with no containment over time, this whole wall is going to fall down, and especially if you're using the necks and holes at the top like I have planned here, they're going to slowly pull out of those and the whole wall is going to collapse. So the idea of this is to create a frame that holds this in. Part of my inspiration, I just saw a discussion with Neil deGrasse Tyson on, I think it was from Star Talk, with his partner in crime there. I forget the name of the guy who does that with him. The flavor commentary guy, your everyman, the straight man with Neil deGrasse Tyson. Anyways, he talked about water towers, and it was pretty interesting. He said people have often asked him about why water towers have the strange bands and why they aren't even. And he said if you imagine a water tower, which is just a big can for water, a big metal cylinder basically, if you divide it into thirds and imagine it as three separate units, and he used the example of, say this was a 1,500 gallon water tower, so you have 500 in each of these thirds. He said that, I don't want that anyway. He pointed out that when you're dealing with this top third, you have 500 pounds of weight of the water pushing down, which also converts into outward force with a liquid. And so they may put, let me switch to black. They may put a single metal band around it to keep it contained, and that band goes all the way around and is is welded, so that's a strong containment band. This second, the middle part though, you've got the 500 pounds of water plus the 500 above it, so your pressure outward is doubled. So what they'll do is put two bands there, around that one. Same for the third. It's triple the pressure of the top, so they'll put three bands around. So you end up with these water towers, especially in New York where they're common, on every building, because of the heights of the building and the reservoir that feeds it. Anyways, so this basic strategy applies to this too, is that you're not going to have to worry about bending at the top much because it's not supporting much weight, and the frame is not resting on these bottles, it's just holding it. So in general you're going to need more containment closer to the bottom, but that's only part of the thought. My real concern is I picture a shower house. I picture kids kind of horse playing, running, tripping, whatever, and probably the worst thing that could happen is somebody falling into this wall, and especially since this isn't attached at top and bottom, it's just held there by gravity. Anybody applying a lateral force to the center of that column is just gonna bend it, and it's gonna pop out, and you're gonna have problems. So part of the idea is to just give it more strength in case there's accidental bumps into it, and along those lines it makes sense to follow a pattern of where you're going to get hit. You've probably seen it's common to have trim near the floor in your houses, and on doors they call them kick plates. And so in part of the containment you're going to want to hold the bases in. So my thought is if you're using 2x4s, this will stick up a couple inches on the sides, because your base 2x4 is flat, and then you're going to contain on the sides. Um, and then, and that'll help protect against kicking, but it also contains the base in. And moving up about knee high, it would be 1.5 feet. About waist high would be 3 feet. And then, you know, this fourth one is probably pretty flexible. I just measured my kind of shoulder height and got close to 4.5 feet. And this actually makes a pretty even spacing for the bottom. The visible part is going to vary a little bit because here you've got some of the board overlapping the base, which is going to change. See, I've put the zero measurement at the floor, and then I've centered the rest of these around these target areas. And that can be pretty flexible, but the basic way to build this would be on the floor, flat, construct the base of this frame and one side and start laying your columns down against the bottom and as far to the left as you can, and just keep doing that going across. If you can measure the spacing of the necks and drill holes in the top, then you should be able to, and in fact it'll be easier to start from the top if that's the case. Insert all those necks into the holes. So probably you want to build the flat on the ground, you know, like this. You're going to want to build a side and the top, lay in all your columns, then attach the bottom and the other side so they're squeezed in tight. Then on the top side, you're going to want to layer the 4 of these containment. I've been calling them trim over here. Because I don't think they need to be as substantial as the 2x4s for your frame. I've put them as 1x4s here. And yeah, once you get the 4 on the top, then you got to find a way to flip it and get the 4 on the bottom, or on the other side, you know, once it's back upright. And I only put 2 here because I was thinking you might be able to get away with just 2 on the outside, 0 and 3 feet probably. But I'm still worried that these may bend outward over time, so you may just want to do 4 on each side. I think it will be sufficient. And I measured I got a couple 2 liters. Strawberry lemonade. It's actually hard. I wanted to buy some that didn't have a deposit. Here in Michigan, we have a 10-cent deposit on everything that's carbonated. Which was a result of the milk and juice lobbies. They felt that a deposit seemed too much like a tax, and talked to the people in Michigan. Anyways, recycling rates. I don't know if I mentioned this last time. I saw recently that Norway has a 97% recycling rate of plastic bottles specifically. The US overall has a 31% plastic bottle recycling rate. Michigan, where we have, well, let me get to that in a second, has a 91% recycle rate, I think. Now, the reason for these numbers is not how nice humans are or how much they love the environment or things like that. The difference is specifically the laws and the incentives the laws create. Come on. In the U.S. overall, we don't have recycling laws really, and there's no mandated deposit. So nationally, only less than a third of our plastic bottles end up recycled. And so most of them end up out and about in the wild, in nature, floating away in the ocean, or in landfills, which is just kicking it to the curb, so to speak. Now, Norway has such a huge rate because they have deposits on all metal, plastic, and glass containers, I think. So they pay a premium when they buy anything in one of those containers, and when they return it, they get that money back. And that incentivizes almost all of it to get recycled. Now, the reason Michigan is lower than Norway is, in my opinion, specifically because our 10-cent deposit, which is the highest in the country, is only on carbonated. And like I said, that was because the milk and juice lobbies, you know, like they pushed this, and the politicians in Michigan went along with it because, in a way, this is what they might call a sin tax or whatever. They wanted to encourage people to consume healthier beverages and sort of shift people away from what we in Michigan call pop, what they call Coke down south, what they call soda out west, carbonated beverages. So yeah, it's kind of weird because in my mind it should completely be about the materials of the container, because once you consume what's inside, it's what's left you're concerned with recycling. So in my opinion, to get a better recycling rate in the country, we need to, institute more of these deposit laws. And I'd like to give a shout out to Maine and Hawaii. Yep. Maine and Hawaii have 5 cents. 5 cents, regardless of what's inside. So the reason I bought this lemonade is because it's non-carbonated and I'm planning to cut it up, and I didn't want to spend 10 cents just on the bottle to cut it into stripping, and I'm going to make a separate video about that later. But, yeah, shout out to Maine and Hawaii. California, they've got a cash refund thing. It fluctuates based on the value of the materials. So that makes some amount of sense, but the problem is when you don't see what you're going to get back, it de-incentivizes you. I mean, like a 5-cent return is pretty minimal. It adds up, though. But when you can't even add it up, when they don't tell you the amount, it hardly seems worth doing. And I think California relies on all their hippies to get over that hump. So, okay, enough of that. We need to improve our incentives. And just as an aside, personal strong opinion of mine, compost pickup should be free. Whoop. Recycling pickup should be free. This is in any municipality with a good enough infrastructure to be doing these things. Trash pickup should cost money, and it should either be per bag or per pound. And jurisdictions can decide that, but we've got in Ann Arbor, we've got trucks that have an auto lift arm that comes by and grabs our large containers. They have a wheel and picks them up and dumps them into the back. So it would cost money, of course, but if they could add a thing that measures the weight of that as it picks it up and then subtracts the weight of the container after it sets it down, we could be billing people by weight for the amount of trash that they want picked up. But incentivize them to recycle and compost. And I think it was Maine again, they have a compost pickup system. And the part about it I loved the most is if you don't care, you can put out compost and they'll pick it up and take it away for free. If you want compost, they pick up your bucket and give you a bucket of fertilizer. So they instead of a time delay and having to manage your own compost pile and turn it and wait, you give them new compost that they take to their system, and they immediately give you usable compost for your garden. But by making that optional, they manage their system so that they have extra compost. So they probably sell some of it to make money. Anyways, so that's the basics of this, the layout. I wasn't sure if you wanted to go 7 or 6 feet high. Of course, that's flexible. That'll change some of these dimensions. To cover this, I just wanted to give you some numbers. So what I've drawn here is my idea of an 8-foot that has a 2x4 helping support it in the center, which is going to take more wood, but you save on screws and stuff. And of course, if you're doing a long span like that, it's going to be easier to build one of these, I think. Anyways, I'm trying to give you options. I didn't want to keep it completely, like with X's or Y's or whatever. Didn't want too many variables. So I've thought of a 7-foot height. I've used those numbers here. So the horizontal members, there's just 2, whether you're doing 4 or 8 feet. The vertical members, there's 2 if you're doing like a half wall. And there's 3 because there's that third one if you're doing an 8-foot length. And of course, those affect the lengths of those. So the 2x4 frame, which is just that centerpiece, these are the total lengths, and you're going to need more than that, obviously, because they come in sections, and you're going to need to cut them to size, and you're going to have some scraps. But this is a good start, and if you're trying to scale this up, you can take how many lengths of wall you need and multiply these numbers and add a little bit for the extra. And then these containment pieces I've called trim here. You've got 4 on each side. That leads to 32 feet of trim. Or I've said 1x4 here. They don't necessarily have to be rectangular. In fact, you probably could try and salvage wood, or you could even buy, there's ornamental trim pieces that the profile, might have some ribbing or whatever. And this would be like a kick plate. Anyways, there's some flexibility with those trim pieces, because the main idea is just get a flat side to hold these together. I started to talk about this bottle. These are a little bit more than 4 inches wide, but I think you're cutting off the base. Oh, that was another thought. You might start your column with a full bottle, so that it has a normal base. It might help keep it flatter, and for these partitions, you might as well use the plastic from one bottle to start your height, and then start, because I think you were cutting them here for more strength and stacking them. But I think you'll get more height from less plastic. You're saving plastic if you do that. So start with a normal bottle. That's a bad base, anyways. And then start adding the Anyways, that's a horrible sketch, but I'm at a weird angle. Some idea of screws. That's just with 2 at each connection point, which is pretty common for 2x4s and does pretty well. Sometimes it's smart to stagger them a little. You of course need to line up with whatever's behind, but sometimes people stagger them a little or whatever. But with that in mind, this how many screws you need, not that important. All right, I'm going to wipe that. The bottles are a little bit wider. These 2x4s, the 2 liters are pack. They're a little bit wider than 4 inches. But I think the 2x4s will work okay. They'll actually be smaller than 4 inches. But I think you can squeeze sideways a little bit laterally. I think that'll work. Gosh, I'd like to do testing on that. But you might want to do some testing with what you can do with the columns. What size can you squeeze them down to? And that's for the 2 liter. Those are about 4. Well, I should have remeasured these. Oh, tape measure. Good. I think I got like 4 1/4. Yeah, it looks like about 4 1/4. An additional issue, you have a lot of columns made from the smaller bottles, like the 16 or 20 ounce. Those are going to be, I don't have one handy, those are going to be more like 3 inches wide. So a couple options. Of course, you can buy smaller than 2x4s. But that's not as common. That's going to be tricky. I think another idea might be just to use these same sizes, which the columns are going to be thinner than your, where's my green? Green is wood. So like your base 2x4, or maybe that's the top. One thing you could do is stagger these. So put the first plastic bottle to the back, put the next one to the front, and continue that. And just by pushing them in, you're going to get that strength, and they'll still be contained. The real challenge with that is if you're doing the holes in the top to feed in the necks of the bottles, then you're going to have to do some figuring for where those holes end up. And if you're pre-drilling them, which I think getting a scheme and pre-drilling them will speed up the whole process. You're going to need to figure out where these center lines fall on the board, and then what the spacing ends up between them. But I think if you do one test, you can get those measurements and then start knocking them out routinely. And I also think that this might look pretty cool to have a little bit of staggered depth in the wall. I think I covered everything. Let's see. One thing I wanted to say about construction. I mentioned using dowels in the neck, and these, it seems pretty clear that you're going to need 1.5 inches diameter holes for the necks. If you're dealing with the inside, that looks pretty close to 3/4. And my initial thought was if you had a dowel in the center for stability, that was that appropriate size diameter. My thought was you could start just dropping these down on so that you have a neck around there that comes out into the bottle, and then you can just keep dropping more necks, so that they stack up. And if you cut these real straight, they're going to stay vertical. But one thing I realized is this dowel might help you get them stacked up and in a straight line. And then if you want to tape, if you want to use tape, you could probably run just one line of tape up each side. Just kind of wrap it around one side, vertically, because I think you were spiraling with the tape before, which was using a lot of tape. If you did this and just taped both sides, you could probably then remove the dowel, and that will have helped you align these really well. And then when you go to put it in the wall, line up the tape on the left and the right so it isn't as visible. And with that way, a single rod might help, like I said, align those or speed up the process. And then, pull it out, reuse it. That might be a good plan. Okay, I'm almost through everything that's in my head, I think. There's probably going to be a couple things I forget, as usual. But I can just send that in a Facebook message or what have you. I feel like there was one other thing. I mentioned paint in my last video. I don't think you want to use paint. I had some thoughts on plastic sheeting, and of course these plastic strips and the cutter. But I think I'm going to include that in my next video. After I try and make a cutter with my dad and play around with this a little bit, I want to see how the plastic knots, how handled it is, and I want to play with a heat source to see how it acts, because I've read that it shrinks and stiffens the plastic, but I think it also makes it more brittle. So anyway, yeah, those are my thoughts, I guess. God, I need a cleaner. It's kind of coming off. This was a curb find. One thing I like about living in Ann Arbor is about twice a year, people just leave stuff on their curb. TVs, refrigerators, lamps, couches, all sorts of stuff. So it's got some damage. It's got some definite water damage from where I think it was sitting in a basement. But that's just darn fine reclaim right there. And it's better than using all this paper. I was using all this paper, and I was thinking that one advantage of the paper is that I have it. I'm not on that, but there's paper. But that's just been sitting around for years anyways. Okay, yeah. Insert catchphrase here, please.